Have you ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to celebrate your happiness, only to realize that you were standing there completely alone? Have you ever felt your heart shatter into so many pieces that you couldn't even recognize the sound it made when it broke? Let me tell you about the day that destroyed me and simultaneously gave birth to the woman I was always meant to become. This is my story, raw and unfiltered, about how I rose from the ashes of humiliation to become the person my ex-fiancé never thought I could be. The woman he now fears. My name doesn't matter, but my journey does, because maybe somewhere in my pain, you'll find the courage to transform your own. I was 27 years old when I found myself standing at the altar of St. Catherine's Church on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The church was decorated exactly as I had dreamed. White roses cascading down every pew, soft candlelight creating an ethereal glow, and the scent of jasmine floating through the air like a promise of forever. My dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, custom-made over 6 months of fittings, each stitch representing my hopes for our future together. I remember how the fabric felt against my skin, both comforting and suffocating at the same time. My hands were trembling as I held the bouquet of peonies and garden roses, my mother's favorite flowers, which she had insisted would bring me luck in marriage. The photographer had already taken hundreds of photos of me getting ready, capturing every moment of anticipation, every nervous smile, every tear of joy that I thought were tears of happiness. But looking back now, I realize might have been my soul's way of warning me about what was coming. The church was packed with 300 guests, friends from college, family members who had traveled from across the country, colleagues from work, neighbors who had watched me grow up, and distant relatives who barely knew me but wouldn't miss the social event of the season. Everyone was dressed in their finest attire, sitting in those uncomfortable wooden pews, fanning themselves with the ceremony programs because the August heat made the church feel like an oven, despite the air conditioning running at full blast. The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's Canon in D, the music swelling through the sacred space, each note building the anticipation for the moment when I would walk down that aisle and promise forever to the man I had loved for 5 years. My father was standing beside me in the vestibule, looking handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his eyes already glistening with unshed tears because his little girl was about to become someone's wife. He had practiced his walk down the aisle at least 20 times during the rehearsal the night before, determined not to trip or cry or do anything that would embarrass me on my special day. I could feel the weight of his arm linked through mine, solid and reassuring, a connection to my childhood and everything I was about to leave behind as I stepped into this new chapter of my life. My bridesmaids were all in position. 6 of my closest friends wearing the dusty rose gowns we had spent months selecting, each holding their own bouquets and wearing smiles that I now realize were tinged with something that wasn't quite happiness, though I was too caught up in my own emotions to notice at the time. The wedding coordinator, a woman named Sylvia, who had planned hundreds of weddings and had seen everything, kept checking her watch and then glancing at her phone with an expression that should have alarmed me, but didn't, because I was too lost in the fantasy of the moment to read the warning signs that were screaming all around me. The doors to the main sanctuary were closed, and through the ornate stained glass windows, I could see the distorted shapes of all those people waiting for me, waiting to witness my transformation from Miss to Mrs., waiting to celebrate what they believed would be a beautiful union between 2 people who were meant to be together. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might actually burst through the bodice of my dress, and I kept taking these shallow breaths that made my mother, who was fussing with my veil, tell me to calm down and breathe properly, or I would hyperventilate before I even made it down the aisle. I can still remember every single sensation of that moment. The way my stiletto heels felt slightly too tight, the way the boning in my corset pressed against my ribs, the way my engagement ring caught the light and sent little rainbows dancing across the white walls, the way my stomach was doing these nervous flips that I mistook for excitement, but were actually my intuition trying desperately to warn me that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Then Sylvia's phone rang, and I watched her face change from professional calm to something I can only describe as controlled panic, as she listened to whoever was on the other end of that call. She stepped away from us, turning her back and speaking in hushed, urgent tones that I couldn't quite hear over the music and the murmur of the waiting crowd and my own thundering heartbeat. When she turned back to face me, her professional mask had slipped just enough for me to see the pity in her eyes, and that's when the first crack appeared in my perfect day, though I didn't know yet that it wasn't just a crack, but the beginning of a complete collapse of everything I thought my life was going to be. She walked toward me slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal they don't want to startle, and said the words that would replay in my mind for months afterward like a horrible song I couldn't stop hearing, no matter how hard I tried. She said that she had just received a call from Marcus's best man, and that there had been what she carefully termed a situation, and that I needed to remain calm while she explained what was happening. Though how anyone could remain calm while their entire world was about to implode is beyond my comprehension, even now, years later. Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know, because I need you to understand that you're not alone if you have. The music was still playing, the guests were still waiting, my father's hand was still gripping my arm, and Sylvia was telling me that Marcus wasn't coming, that he had left a message saying he couldn't go through with the wedding, that he needed time to figure things out, that he was sorry but he just couldn't do this today. I remember standing there in my expensive dress with my professional makeup and my perfectly styled hair, and feeling like someone had just reached into my chest and ripped out my heart while it was still beating. The words weren't making sense, because how could the man who had proposed to me on a beach in Santorini at sunset, who had spent months helping me plan every detail of this wedding, who had told me just last night at the rehearsal dinner that he was the luckiest man alive to be marrying me, how could that man simply not show up to our wedding? My mind was racing through every possible explanation. Maybe he had been in an accident. Maybe something terrible had happened to his family. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding and he was stuck in traffic, or his car had broken down and his phone had died, and any minute now he would come bursting through those doors apologizing profusely, and we would laugh about this someday as just a crazy mishap on our wedding day. But Sylvia's face told me a different story. Her eyes were telling me that this wasn't an accident or an emergency or a misunderstanding. This was a choice, a deliberate decision that Marcus had made to abandon me at the altar in front of 300 people who were all waiting to watch me become his wife. The sound that came out of my mouth wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob, but something in between, something primal and broken that I had never heard myself make before. My bouquet fell from my hands and hit the marble floor with a soft thud, petals scattering like my dreams. My father's grip on my arm tightened as if he could physically hold me together through the sheer force of his love, but I was already falling apart in ways that couldn't be prevented by anyone's touch. My mother rushed over, her own face pale with shock and confusion, demanding to know what was happening, why we weren't starting the ceremony, where was Marcus, what did Sylvia mean that he wasn't coming. The bridesmaids crowded around me, a circle of dusty rose fabric and concerned faces, their voices all blending together into a cacophony of, "Are you okay? And this can't be happening, and maybe there's been a mistake and someone should call him, and what do we do now?" But I couldn't focus on any of their words because my brain was too busy trying to process the impossible reality that the man I loved had just destroyed me in the most public and humiliating way possible. I thought about all the conversations we had had about our future together, the house we were going to buy, the children we had already named, the trips we had planned, the life we were supposed to build together. I thought about the thousands of dollars we had spent on this wedding, the deposits that were non-refundable, the honeymoon to Bali that was booked and paid for, the apartment we had just signed a lease on together. I thought about how I had turned down a job opportunity in another city because Marcus had asked me to stay, because we were building our life here, because our future was here. I thought about all the times I had defended him to my friends when they said he seemed distant or uncommitted, all the times I had convinced myself that everything was fine when little warning signs had appeared, all the times I had ignored my own intuition because I wanted so desperately to believe in our love story. And now here I was, standing in a church vestibule in a wedding dress that cost more than my car, surrounded by people who pitied me, waiting to marry a man who had decided I wasn't worth showing up for. The wedding coordinator was talking about logistics now, about how we needed to go out and make an announcement to the guests, about how we needed to cancel the reception, about how we needed to handle this situation with as much grace and dignity as possible under the circumstances. But grace and dignity were the last things I felt capable of in that moment. I felt rage and humiliation, and a grief so profound, it felt like someone had died, because in a way, someone had. The version of me who believed in fairy tales and happy endings, and men who kept their promises had died right there in that vestibule, and I didn't know yet who would rise from those ashes. My makeup artist, who had been hovering nearby ready to do last-minute touch-ups, handed me tissues and told me to try not to cry because it would ruin my makeup. And I almost laughed at the absurdity of worrying about mascara running when my entire life had just been ruined. I told Sylvia that I couldn't go out there, that I couldn't face all those people, that someone else needed to make the announcement because I physically couldn't form the words to tell 300 people that I had been left at the altar like some kind of tragic character in a romance novel, except this was real life and real pain, and there was no plot twist coming to save me. My father, bless his heart, straightened his shoulders and said he would do it, that he would go out there and explain the situation and send everyone home, that I should go somewhere private and collect myself, and that we would figure out how to get through this together. I watched him walk through those doors into the sanctuary, and even from the vestibule I could hear the confused murmur of the crowd turn into gasps of shock, and then into a buzz of gossip and speculation that would fuel conversations for months to come. My mother held me while I sobbed into her shoulder, not caring anymore about the dress or the makeup, or maintaining any semblance of composure, because what was the point of pretending to be okay when everything had fallen apart so spectacularly and so publicly? They took me to a small room off the vestibule, a space usually reserved for the priest to prepare for services, and I collapsed onto a wooden bench that was definitely not designed for someone wearing a massive wedding gown. My bridesmaids tried to comfort me, bringing me water and tissues and kind words that bounced off the fortress of pain I had erected around myself. Through the walls, I could hear the sounds of the church emptying out. 300 people who had come to celebrate my happiness, now leaving with a story about the bride who got left at the altar, a cautionary tale they would tell at dinner parties for years to come. I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, staring at the wall and trying to understand how I had gotten here, how I had been so blind to whatever was happening in Marcus's mind that would lead him to do something so cruel. My phone was buzzing constantly with messages and calls, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it because I knew it would be full of questions I didn't have answers to and sympathy I didn't want to accept. Eventually, my best friend Sarah, who had been my maid of honor and had known me since we were roommates in college, sat down next to me and took my hand and said something that would stick with me through all the dark days that followed. She said that this moment, as horrible and painful and humiliating as it was, didn't define me, that Marcus's choice to be a coward didn't diminish my worth, that someday I would look back on this and realize it was the universe saving me from a marriage that would have been wrong. I didn't believe her then, couldn't see past the immediate agony to any kind of future where this made sense, but I held on to her words like a lifeline because they were all I had to keep me from drowning completely in my despair. They eventually convinced me to change out of my wedding dress, and I remember standing in that small room pulling off thousands of dollars worth of silk and lace, and feeling like I was shedding a skin that no longer fit, like I was removing the costume of a character I would never get to play. I put on the jeans and t-shirt that someone had grabbed from my getting ready bag, clothes that felt strange and wrong after spending all morning in bridal finery, and left the church through a back door to avoid any remaining guests or curious onlookers who might still be lingering around. My parents drove me back to their house because I couldn't bear the thought of going to the apartment Marcus and I shared, the space we had carefully decorated together with pieces that represented our combined aesthetic and our shared dreams. I sat in the back seat of their car like a child, watching the familiar streets of my hometown blur past the window, and felt completely disconnected from reality, like I was floating somewhere outside my body watching this tragedy unfold from a safe distance where it couldn't really hurt me except it was hurting me. It was destroying me from the inside out in ways I didn't yet fully comprehend. The next few days were a blur of well-meaning visitors and endless phone calls, and the complicated logistics of canceling a wedding that had already happened, or rather hadn't happened in the way that left you with bills to pay, but no marriage to show for it. My mother fielded calls from the caterer, the florist, the venue, the photographer, the DJ, all asking what to do about their services and their payments, and whether we would be pursuing any kind of refund, which of course we wouldn't, because it wasn't their fault that the groom had decided to be a complete coward. My father dealt with returning gifts that had already arrived, writing awkward notes to relatives explaining that the wedding had been called off, and we appreciated their kindness but couldn't accept their generosity under the circumstances. My friends created a rotation schedule, so someone was always with me, never leaving me alone because they were genuinely worried about my mental state. And honestly, they had reason to be worried because I wasn't eating and I wasn't sleeping, and I spent most of my time either crying or staring into space or both simultaneously. My phone continued to blow up with messages, some from friends offering support, some from acquaintances who barely knew me but wanted to insert themselves into the drama, and eventually, 3 days after the non-wedding, a message from Marcus. He sent a long text, thousands of words trying to explain himself, talking about cold feet and doubts and not being ready and needing to find himself and a bunch of other cliches that people use when they want to justify their terrible behavior without actually taking responsibility for the pain they've caused. He said he had been having second thoughts for months but didn't know how to tell me, that he felt trapped by the momentum of the wedding planning, that he panicked at the last minute and ran. He said he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, that he hoped someday I could forgive him. All the predictable things that someone says when they've done something unforgivable and want to ease their own conscience. What he didn't say, what was conspicuously absent from his lengthy explanation, was anything about love or about me specifically, or about whether he had ever actually wanted to marry me, or if the entire relationship had been a lie he was telling himself until he couldn't sustain the fiction anymore. I read that message probably 50 times, analyzing every word, searching for some hidden meaning or some clue that would help me understand how the person I had shared my life with for 5 years could do something so devastating with apparently no warning. I drafted 100 responses, ranging from venomous attacks on his character to desperate pleas for him to reconsider to cold dismissals of his apology. But in the end, I didn't send anything, because what could I possibly say that would adequately express the depth of betrayal I felt or change anything about the situation I now found myself in? My therapist, who I started seeing immediately at my mother's insistence, told me that I was experiencing a form of grief similar to what people feel when someone dies, that I was mourning not just the relationship but the future I had envisioned, the identity I had built around being Marcus's fiancée and soon-to-be wife. She said it was normal to cycle through denial and anger and bargaining and depression, that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be better than others. But knowing something intellectually and actually experiencing it emotionally are two completely different things. And the intellectual knowledge that I would eventually heal did nothing to ease the visceral pain that consumed me during those early weeks after the wedding that wasn't. I couldn't go back to work right away because I had requested 2 weeks off for the wedding and honeymoon, so I spent that time in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, surrounded by remnants of my teenage years, old posters and yearbooks and trophies from competitions I no longer remembered competing in. I would lie in bed for hours, sometimes sleeping, sometimes just existing in that liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness where nothing felt quite real. My mother would bring me food that I mostly didn't eat, and my father would sit with me in silence because he understood that sometimes presence is more important than words. My friends would text me constantly, checking in, offering to come over, suggesting activities that might distract me, but I rarely responded because engaging with the world required energy I simply didn't have. Social media became both a comfort and a torture device, because I couldn't stop myself from checking Marcus's profiles, even though I knew it would only hurt me more. And sure enough, he had posted some vague statement about needing time to work on himself and thanking people for their understanding during this difficult time, as if he was the victim in this situation, as if he was the one who had been humiliated and heartbroken and left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. The comments on his post were mostly supportive, people telling him to take care of himself, and that they were there for him if he needed anything, and I felt a fresh wave of rage at the unfairness of it all, because where was this support when I was the one who had been wronged? Why was he getting sympathy when he was the one who had caused all this pain? I wanted to comment on his post, to tell everyone the truth about what had happened, to make sure the world knew that he had left me at the altar without warning, and that he wasn't the good guy in this story. But my friends physically took my phone away and changed my social media passwords and told me that engaging would only make things worse, and that the best revenge was to move on and thrive without him. I didn't believe them at the time because thriving felt impossible, when I could barely manage to shower or put on clean clothes or remember to drink water. But I was too exhausted to argue, so I let them take control of my digital life and protect me from my own worst impulses. The wedding dress hung in my closet like a ghost, still in its garment bag, a reminder of the most expensive costume I would ever wear for a performance that got canceled. I couldn't look at it without feeling sick, but I also couldn't bring myself to do anything with it, so it just hung there, taking up space and emotional energy, a physical manifestation of my failed dreams. People kept asking me what I was going to do about the apartment Marcus and I had leased together, but I couldn't even think about that practical problem when I was still trying to figure out how to survive each day without falling apart completely. Eventually, my father went to the apartment, packed up all my belongings, and dealt with Marcus to arrange for me to be taken off the lease. An act of parental love that I couldn't fully appreciate at the time, but would later recognize as incredibly heroic because it meant facing the man who had destroyed his daughter and somehow maintaining civility while doing it. Somewhere around week 3 after the non-wedding, I hit what my therapist would later describe as rock bottom, a moment of such profound darkness that I scared even myself. I was alone in my childhood bedroom, which was a mistake because I shouldn't have been left alone, but everyone was exhausted from their constant vigil, and I had convinced them I was doing better and just needed some space. I spent that entire afternoon and evening spiraling into increasingly dark thoughts about my worthlessness, about how Marcus had clearly seen something fundamentally wrong with me that made me unlovable, about how I would never find happiness or love or anything resembling a normal life. I looked at myself in the mirror and hated what I saw. Not just physically, but the essence of who I was. The person who had been so blind and so stupid and so pathetically in love with someone who didn't actually want her. I thought about all the choices I had made over the past 5 years, how I had molded my life around Marcus's needs and preferences, how I had dimmed my own light to make him feel brighter, how I had ignored every red flag and every moment of doubt because I was so invested in the story I wanted our relationship to be. And I realized with sudden and terrible clarity that Marcus hadn't just broken my heart when he left me at the altar. He had revealed a truth that had existed throughout our entire relationship, but that I had refused to see, which was that I had never been his priority, that I had never been truly valued, that I had accepted crumbs of affection and convinced myself they were a feast. This realization was somehow more painful than the initial abandonment because it meant that everything I thought I knew about our relationship was a lie, that the good times I had cherished were built on a foundation of his indifference and my delusion. I called my best friend Sarah at 2 a.m, sobbing so hard I could barely speak, telling her that I didn't know how to exist in this new reality where everything I believed about myself and my life had been proven false. She came over immediately, climbing through my bedroom window the way she used to when we were teenagers sneaking out, and she held me while I cried and told me over and over that I was going to survive this, that I was stronger than I knew, that this pain wouldn't last forever, even though it felt eternal in that moment. And somewhere in that long, dark night, after the tears had finally stopped and the sun was beginning to rise over the familiar rooftops of my hometown, something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic or sudden or anything like the transformation montages you see in movies, but it was real, and it was the first tiny spark of what would eventually become a raging fire of determination. I realized that I had a choice about what happened next, that I could either let this experience destroy me permanently, or I could use it as a catalyst for becoming someone stronger, someone better, someone who would never again allow another person to define her worth. I thought about all the dreams I had put on hold for Marcus, the job opportunities I had turned down, the friendships I had neglected, the parts of myself I had suppressed because they didn't fit into the neat box of who I thought I needed to be as his partner. And I made a decision that morning, exhausted and puffy-eyed and emotionally drained, but somehow more clear-headed than I had been in years. I decided that I was going to rise from this devastation, not despite what Marcus had done to me, but because of it. That I was going to transform myself so completely that when he eventually saw me again, he would realize exactly what he had lost and regret his choice for the rest of his life. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy, but it started with small, concrete steps that gradually built into something powerful and undeniable. The first thing I did was move out of my parents' house and find my own apartment, a small one-bedroom in a neighborhood I had always loved but never lived in because Marcus preferred the suburbs. It was on the 3rd floor of an old building with hardwood floors that creaked and windows that looked out over a street lined with oak trees, and it was entirely mine in a way that nothing had been mine for years. I furnished it slowly and deliberately, choosing pieces that reflected my taste rather than compromising to accommodate someone else's preferences. I painted the living room walls a deep teal color that Marcus would have hated, but that made me feel alive and creative and connected to the bolder version of myself I was trying to become. I hung artwork that spoke to me, photographs I had taken during a trip to Morocco that Marcus had never wanted to go on, abstract paintings from local artists that evoked emotions I couldn't quite name but felt deeply. I created a space that was a physical manifestation of my independence, a sanctuary where I could begin the work of rebuilding myself from the ground up. The second thing I did was quit my job at the marketing firm where I had been working for 3 years, in a position that paid well, but left me feeling unfulfilled and creatively stifled. Marcus had always praised me for having a stable, respectable job, had encouraged me to stay there even when I talked about wanting to do something more meaningful, had made me feel like my dreams of starting my own business were impractical and risky. But now I had nothing to lose, no one to impress, no one whose approval I needed to seek. So I gave my 2 weeks' notice and used my savings to start a digital consulting agency, focusing on helping small businesses build their online presence. It was terrifying and exciting in equal measure, and there were many moments during those first few months when I doubted myself and wondered if I was making a huge mistake. But I discovered that I was actually good at what I did, that clients appreciated my creativity and dedication, that I could build something successful entirely on my own merit without depending on anyone else for validation or support. The business grew slowly but steadily, and with each new client and each successful project, I felt my confidence rebuilding, my sense of self-worth returning in ways that had nothing to do with romantic relationships or other people's opinions of me. I worked long hours, partly because the business demanded it, and partly because staying busy kept my mind from wandering back to painful memories. And I found that I actually enjoyed the exhaustion that came from pursuing something I was passionate about, rather than just going through the motions at a job I didn't care about. The third thing I did was focus on my physical health in ways I never had before. Not to lose weight or look a certain way for anyone else, but because I needed to feel strong and capable and in control of at least one aspect of my life. I joined a boxing gym, and there was something profoundly therapeutic about channeling all my anger and pain into hitting a punching bag as hard as I could. My trainer, a woman named Diana who had competed professionally and understood what it meant to be knocked down and have to get back up, pushed me harder than I had ever been pushed before. She taught me that physical strength builds mental resilience, that every time I thought I couldn't do another round or throw another punch but did it anyway, I was proving to myself that I was capable of more than I believed. I started running in the mornings before work, pounding the pavement of my new neighborhood while the rest of the city was still waking up. And those solitary runs became a form of moving meditation, where I could process my emotions and plan my future, and gradually shed the identity of the woman who had been left at the altar. I changed my eating habits, not in a restrictive way, but in a way that honored my body and gave me the energy I needed to build my new life. I learned to cook properly for the first time, experimenting with recipes and discovering that I actually enjoyed the creative process of combining ingredients and flavors to make something nourishing and delicious. I started sleeping better, waking up feeling rested instead of exhausted, noticing that my face looked different in the mirror, not just because I had lost some weight, but because there was a determination in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness that came from surviving something that could have broken me but hadn't. People started commenting on how different I looked, how healthy and strong and somehow more vibrant. But the physical changes were just the most visible manifestation of the internal transformation that was taking place, the profound shift in how I saw myself and my place in the world. I wasn't trying to become beautiful for anyone else or to make Marcus regret leaving me, though I'd be lying if I said the thought of him seeing the new me and feeling regret didn't bring me some satisfaction. I was becoming the version of myself that had always existed underneath the layers of people-pleasing and self-doubt and the compromises I had made to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. I was becoming the woman I was always meant to be before I met Marcus, before I started editing myself to be more palatable and less challenging and easier to love. I was becoming whole again, but a different kind of whole than I had been before. One that had been broken and carefully pieced back together with gold running through the cracks like the Japanese art of kintsugi, more beautiful and valuable for having been broken and repaired. The fourth thing I did was invest in my personal growth in ways that went beyond just career and physical health. I started reading voraciously, devouring books about psychology and philosophy and spirituality, and successful women who had overcome adversity to build extraordinary lives. I took online courses in subjects that interested me, from creative writing to financial planning to public speaking, accumulating knowledge and skills not because I needed them for any practical purpose, but because learning made me feel alive and engaged with the world in ways I hadn't felt in years. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my relationship with Marcus, people who reminded me of who I used to be before I became consumed with being someone's fiancé. I made new friends too, women I met at the boxing gym and through my business networking and at a book club I joined on a whim. Women who were strong and independent and pursuing their own dreams with a ferocity that inspired me to reach higher and push harder. I started traveling alone, taking weekend trips to nearby cities and eventually booking a solo vacation to Iceland, something I had always wanted to do, but Marcus had never been interested in. Standing in front of a massive waterfall in a foreign country, completely alone but not at all lonely, I felt more powerful and more myself than I had ever felt when I was part of a couple. I learned that I enjoyed my own company, that I didn't need someone else to validate my experiences or share my adventures, that I was enough all by myself. I started journaling every night, writing about my progress and my setbacks, my victories and my continued struggles, creating a record of my transformation that I could look back on when I had moments of doubt. I went to therapy consistently, doing the hard work of examining my patterns and understanding why I had accepted less than I deserved, learning to set boundaries and communicate my needs and recognize red flags before I got too invested. I worked on my relationship with my parents, appreciating them in new ways, for how they had supported me through the worst time of my life, but also establishing myself as an independent adult who made her own decisions and lived her own life. I cultivated a spiritual practice that wasn't about religion exactly, but about connecting with something larger than myself, whether that was nature or the universe or just the collective energy of humanity. finding peace in the understanding that my small personal tragedy was just one thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. I learned to meditate, to sit with uncomfortable emotions without trying to escape them, to observe my thoughts without being consumed by them. I volunteered at a women's shelter, helping others who were rebuilding their lives after traumatic relationships. And in their courage and resilience, I found inspiration for my own journey. I stopped looking at Marcus's social media, stopped wondering what he was doing or who he was with, stopped giving him any space in my mind or my heart because he had already taken enough from me, and I refused to give him another moment of my precious time and energy. By the time a year had passed since the non-wedding, I was a completely different person living a completely different life. My business was thriving, with a full roster of clients and a waiting list of new ones who wanted to work with me. I had been featured in a local business magazine as an entrepreneur to watch, and I had been invited to speak at a marketing conference about building a successful solo practice in the digital age. I was in the best physical shape of my life, with muscles I didn't know I could have, and an energy that seemed boundless. I had a group of close friends who truly knew me and supported me, and I had learned to enjoy dating casually without the pressure of finding a serious relationship, because I no longer believed that I needed a partner to be complete or happy. I had traveled to 5 countries, read over 100 books, learned to speak conversational Spanish, taken up painting, and started writing a blog about my experiences that had developed a small but engaged following of women who were going through their own transformations. I had moved into a bigger apartment, one with enough space for a home office where I could meet clients, and I had adopted a rescue dog named Phoenix because the symbolism felt appropriate, and also because I wanted a companion who would love me unconditionally without any complicated human drama. My relationship with myself had fundamentally changed. I liked who I was. I respected my own strength and resilience. I trusted my judgment and my intuition in ways I never had before. The grief and anger and humiliation that had consumed me in those early days had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly because I hadn't forgotten what Marcus did, and probably never would, but a kind of detached indifference where he simply didn't matter to me anymore. I rarely thought about him, and when I did, it was with a vague sense of pity for the person he had revealed himself to be rather than the burning rage I had felt before. I had truly moved on, not in the sense of finding someone new to replace him, but in the sense of building a life so rich and fulfilling that his absence was completely irrelevant to my happiness. I was proud of myself in ways I had never been proud before, not because of external achievements, though those were significant, but because I had faced the worst thing I could imagine happening, and not only survived but thrived, had taken what was meant to destroy me, and used it as fuel to become stronger than I ever thought possible. ¿Te ha pasado algo similar? Cuéntamelo en los comentarios porque quiero que sepas que no estás solo en esto. Then, about 14 months after the non-wedding, I saw Marcus again, and the encounter was nothing like I had imagined it would be during all those months when I fantasized about running into him and making him realize what he had lost. I was at a networking event for local business owners, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that made me feel powerful and professional, talking with a potential client about their social media strategy. I saw him before he saw me, standing near the bar with a drink in his hand, looking somehow smaller than I remembered, less impressive, like seeing a landmark from your childhood, and realizing it was never actually as big as you thought it was. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize, and he had that same slightly uncomfortable expression he always got at networking events where he was forced to make small talk with strangers. For a moment, I considered leaving, avoiding the interaction entirely, but then I realized that would give him too much power, would suggest that I still cared enough to alter my behavior based on his presence. So I stayed where I was and continued my conversation with genuine enthusiasm because I truly was excited about the potential project we were discussing. Eventually, he noticed me, did a visible double take, and I watched various emotions flicker across his face too quickly for me to fully identify them all. Though surprise and something that might have been regret were definitely in the mix. He excused himself from his conversation and started walking toward me, and I felt my heart rate increase slightly, but not from anxiety or residual feelings, more from the anticipation of a confrontation I had been unconsciously preparing for over the past year. I finished my conversation, exchanged business cards with the potential client, and turned to face Marcus with a calm smile that I was pleased to discover was completely genuine. He looked nervous, shifty even, his eyes not quite meeting mine as he said hello and asked how I was doing as if we were casual acquaintances who hadn't seen each other in a while rather than former fiancés whose relationship had ended in spectacular public humiliation. I replied that I was doing excellent, that my business was going really well, that life was good, and I watched him struggle to formulate a response, clearly not expecting the poised and confident woman standing in front of him. He asked if we could talk privately, and after a moment's consideration, I agreed, curious what he could possibly have to say after all this time, and confident that nothing he said could hurt me anymore, because I had moved so far beyond the person I was when I knew him. We found a quiet corner away from the main crowd, and he launched into what sounded like a prepared speech, telling me that he had been thinking about me a lot, that he knew he had hurt me badly, that he had made a terrible mistake, that he hoped we could maybe reconnect and at least be friends if nothing else. I listened without interrupting, watching him fumble through his words, and I realized with startling clarity that he had expected to find me broken, that some part of him had wanted to find me still devastated and pining for him, because it would validate his importance in my life and perhaps ease his guilt about what he had done. But instead he was confronted with evidence that I had not only survived his abandonment, but had flourished in his absence, that I had become someone more successful and confident and put together than I ever was when we were together. I could see the moment when this realization hit him, when his expression shifted from nervous hope to something that looked almost like fear, as if he was suddenly understanding that the door he had slammed shut was permanently locked, and he no longer had any access to my life or my heart. When he finished talking, I took a breath and responded with a calmness that surprised even me. I told him that I appreciated his apology, but I didn't need it for my own healing, because I had already done that work without him. I told him that I harbored no ill will toward him, but I also had no interest in maintaining any kind of relationship, friendship, or otherwise, because we were essentially strangers, now leading completely separate lives. I told him that leaving me at the altar was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to become the person I was always meant to be, and I genuinely thanked him for giving me that opportunity through his cowardice. I watched his face change as I spoke, saw the realization dawn that there would be no redemption arc for him in my story, no second chances, no opportunity to absolve himself of guilt by earning my forgiveness. I told him I hoped he found whatever he was looking for when he ran away from our wedding, and then I excused myself because I had other people to network with, and a business to run, and a life that was far too full and interesting to waste any more time on conversations about our dead relationship. As I walked away from him, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't known I needed, a final confirmation that I really had moved on, and that the transformation I had worked so hard to achieve was real and permanent. I glanced back once and saw him still standing there looking lost and diminished, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no residual attraction, nothing but a vague sort of pity for someone who had let fear make his decisions, and would probably always wonder what might have been if he had been brave enough to show up that day. But I wasn't wondering about might-have-beens anymore because my life was too full of actual experiences and real achievements and genuine happiness to waste time on hypothetical scenarios. I went back to the networking event, made valuable connections, left with 3 potential new clients and invitations to 2 other professional events, and drove home to my beautiful apartment where Phoenix was waiting for me with his enthusiastic greeting that never failed to make me smile. I changed into comfortable clothes, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony looking out over the city lights, reflecting on how far I had come and how grateful I was for the journey even though it had been so painful. I thought about the woman I was on that wedding day, standing in her expensive dress waiting to marry a man who didn't show up, and I wished I could go back and tell her that this wasn't the end of her story, but just the beginning, that the pain she was feeling would transform into strength, that she would rise from that moment and become someone she couldn't even imagine yet but would be proud to be. I thought about all the women out there who were going through their own versions of heartbreak and humiliation, who felt like they would never recover from the pain they were experiencing, and I wanted them to know that they would not only recover but could use that pain as fuel for the most incredible transformation of their lives. In the days following that encounter with Marcus, I heard through mutual friends that he had been telling people he made a mistake letting me go, that he didn't realize what he had until it was gone, that he wished he could go back and do things differently. Part of me, the petty part that I'm not entirely proud of but also won't apologize for, felt vindicated by this information because it meant my transformation had achieved its intended effect of making him regret his decision. But the larger, wiser part of me understood that his regret was irrelevant to my happiness and my continued growth, that I hadn't actually become this new version of myself to win him back or make him jealous, but because I genuinely wanted to be the best possible version of who I could be. His regret was his problem to deal with, not mine, and I refused to take on any emotional labor around managing his feelings or making him feel better about the choices he made. I had spent too much of our relationship managing his emotions and making myself smaller to accommodate his insecurities, and I was done with that pattern forever. I blocked his number when he started texting me again, asking to meet for coffee so we could talk more, saying he had things he needed to tell me, trying to insert himself back into my life in whatever capacity I would allow. I deleted the messages without reading them fully, because I knew that nothing he could say would change anything, and engaging would only give him an opening to try to manipulate me back into caring about him. My friends warned me that he was likely experiencing what they called the grass is greener syndrome, realizing that the single life he thought he wanted wasn't as fulfilling as the relationship he destroyed, wanting to come back now that he saw I had moved on and was thriving. They told me to be careful, to protect my peace, to remember how much it had hurt when he left me, and not let nostalgia or his sudden remorse make me forget the reality of who he had shown himself to be. But they didn't need to worry because I had zero interest in revisiting that chapter of my life, zero temptation to give him another chance, zero desire to help him feel better about himself at the expense of my own well-being and progress. The truth that I came to understand through all of this is that the best revenge really is living well, not because you're trying to make someone regret hurting you, but because you're so focused on building an amazing life that you don't have time or energy to waste on revenge at all. Marcus had wanted to break me when he left me at the altar, whether that was his conscious intention or not, because leaving someone in such a public and humiliating way is an act of destruction. But what he didn't count on, what he couldn't have predicted, was that I would take that broken version of myself and rebuild her into something stronger and more beautiful than the original. He feared the woman I became, not because I had become mean or vindictive, but because I had become completely indifferent to him, because I had built a life so full and rich that he was completely irrelevant to it, because I had moved so far beyond the dynamics of our relationship that there was no way for him to affect me anymore. His fear wasn't of me specifically, but of his own irrelevance, of the realization that he had thrown away something valuable and couldn't get it back no matter what he did. And that's a fear he would have to live with for the rest of his life, while I continued moving forward, building my business, traveling the world, cultivating meaningful relationships, and becoming more myself with each passing day. The woman he left at the altar was afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid of not being enough. The woman I became was afraid of nothing, because I had already survived the worst thing I could imagine, and come out the other side not just intact, but improved. I learned that I was capable of incredible resilience and strength, that I could rebuild my entire life from the ground up, that I didn't need anyone else to complete me or validate me or make me happy because I could do all of those things for myself. Now, several years later, my life looks nothing like I thought it would when I was planning that wedding that never happened. My business has expanded beyond what I dreamed possible. I have a team of employees. I've been invited to speak at conferences around the country. I've been featured in national publications, and I've become known in my industry as an expert in my field. I bought a house, something I never thought I could do on my own. A beautiful renovated Victorian with original hardwood floors and a garden where I grow vegetables and herbs. I've traveled to 23 countries, sometimes alone and sometimes with friends, collecting experiences and memories that are entirely my own. I've published articles about entrepreneurship and resilience that have resonated with thousands of people. I've continued my boxing training and have actually competed in a few amateur matches, winning some and losing others, but feeling victorious regardless, because I had the courage to step into the ring. I've dated different people, some relationships lasting a few months, and others just a few dates. And I've learned that I'm perfectly content being single because I genuinely enjoy my own company and my independence. I'm not closed off to the possibility of a serious relationship in the future, but I'm no longer desperately seeking one because I understand now that a partner should add to an already fulfilling life, not complete an incomplete one. The narrative that we need romantic love to be whole is one of the most damaging stories we tell ourselves, and unlearning that narrative has been one of the most liberating aspects of my transformation. I've learned that the relationship with myself is the most important one I'll ever have, and that investing in that relationship, through therapy, through personal growth, through self-care, through pursuing my passions, pays dividends in every other area of my life. I've learned to trust my intuition, to listen to the quiet voice inside that knows the truth even when my conscious mind wants to ignore it. I've learned that it's okay to be selfish with my time and energy, to say no to things that don't serve me, to prioritize my own well-being over other people's comfort. I've learned that closure doesn't always come from external sources, but from internal decisions to stop waiting for explanations or apologies or validation that may never come. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt, but about integrating the experience into your story in a way that gives you wisdom rather than bitterness. If you're reading this and you're going through something similar, if you've been betrayed or abandoned or humiliated by someone you loved, I want you to know that this pain you're feeling right now is not the end of your story. I know it feels like you'll never recover, like the hurt is too deep and too profound to ever heal, but I promise you that time and intentional effort really do make a difference. You will survive this, and if you're willing to do the hard work of transforming yourself, you will not only survive but thrive in ways you can't imagine right now. The person who hurt you does not get to define your worth or determine your future unless you let them, and you have so much more power than you realize in this moment. You get to decide what happens next. You get to choose whether this experience destroys you or forges you into something stronger. You get to write the rest of your story however you want it to go. It won't be easy, and there will be days when you want to give up, when the pain feels overwhelming, when you question whether you have the strength to keep going. But I'm telling you from experience that you do have that strength even if you can't feel it right now. Start small. Find one thing you can do today that's just for you. One choice you can make that prioritizes your well-being. One step toward becoming the person you want to be. And then tomorrow do it again. And the next day. And the day after that. Until slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, you start to notice that you're feeling a little stronger, a little more capable, a little more like yourself, or maybe like a new and improved version of yourself. Surround yourself with people who support your growth, cut off anyone who tries to keep you stuck in your pain or minimize what you've been through, and be patient with yourself because healing is not linear and there will be setbacks, and that's completely normal and okay. Invest in therapy if you can because having a trained professional help you process your emotions and identify your patterns is invaluable. Take care of your physical health because the mind-body connection is real, and when your body feels strong, your mind follows. Find something you're passionate about and throw yourself into it, whether that's a career goal or a creative pursuit or a fitness challenge or anything that makes you feel alive and engaged with the world. Travel if you can, even if it's just to the next town over, because seeing new places and having new experiences helps you remember that there's a whole world out there beyond your current pain. Read books about people who overcame adversity. Watch documentaries about resilience. Listen to podcasts about personal growth. Consume content that reinforces the message that transformation is possible. Journal about your feelings and your progress so you can look back and see how far you've come. Celebrate small victories because they all matter and they all add up to significant change over time. And please, please understand that you deserve better than someone who would hurt you the way you've been hurt, that the right person would never put you through this kind of pain, that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who doesn't value you properly. Have you ever been through a similar experience where someone's betrayal ended up being the catalyst for your greatest transformation? I really want to hear your story, so please share it in the comments below because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or inspiration or made you feel less alone in your own struggle, please hit that like button because it really does help me understand what content is meaningful to you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to I Live to Tell for more stories of resilience and transformation. More narratives about people who faced impossible situations and found ways not just to survive, but to thrive. Make sure to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story because I promise you, there are so many more incredible journeys to share, so many more examples of human strength and courage, and the ability to rise from the ashes of our worst moments. Thank you for being here, for listening to my story, for being part of this community of survivors and warriors and people who refuse to let their pain define them. Remember that you are so much stronger than you think, that you are capable of incredible things, that your story isn't over just because someone else tried to write the ending for you. You get to decide what happens next. And I believe in your ability to create something beautiful from the broken pieces. Stay strong, keep fighting, and never forget that the best revenge is becoming the person you were always meant to be. I'll see you in the next story.